The nighttime apocalypse from a commercial flight near Adelaide. The destruction below showing absolutely no let-up, with dry conditions in a drought-stricken land continuing. 2 more people killed in the past 24 hours, 23 firefighters injured. Home after home consumed by fires too big, too numerous to be put out. Continuing strong winds and mid-40s temperatures fueling fire fronts across New South Wales, Queensland, South Australia, Tasmania, Western Australia. And a nation demonstrating political atrophy. Prime Minister Scott Morrison sneaked off on holiday, leaving officials to mount a cover-up. He then sneaked back in overnight from Hawaii, avoiding waiting media at the airport. A political firestorm to deal with now, and largely of his own making.
He's had a 4-day getaway in Hawaii.
Chris,
Big
yelling
deal.
at me will not convince
Big deal.
me. It's about leadership. And leadership is not necessarily being in the battlefield. It's showing that your sentiments, your empathy, your vision and your intellect are applied to the problem.
Fire chiefs nationwide reticent of demanding more central government resources on the one hand, but telling the world they can't control the fires on the other. Government ministers, meanwhile, defend their boss, claiming the situation is being managed.
The reality is the operational management of fires sits with the state governments, and they do an exemplary job, and they have proven that. We need to get out of their hair at times. There's sometimes been too many politicians around. You need to stay away from them and just let them do the job. But when they want something, you give it to them straight away.
In fact, state fire crews are becoming exhausted after weeks of this. They can't put the fires out. Only sustained rains can do that, and there is little sign of them occurring much before late February. So expect to hear a great deal more of that official designation, catastrophic fire danger.
Catastrophic fire dangers are as bad as it gets. These are the very worst of conditions, and given that we've got a landscape with so much fire active and burning in it, you've got a recipe for very serious concern.
Lines of cars as families flee in South Australia. The latest fatalities occurred overnight in this state, underlining this is a national crisis, not confined to the east coasts of New South Wales and Queensland. A number of people were also seriously injured as the blazes swept into isolated and not so isolated settlements around Adelaide, the capital of that state.
Well, of course, it is now currently middle of the night in Australia, so it was earlier that I spoke to Greg Mullins, former head of the fire service in New South Wales and now a climate change campaigner. He was about to head off again to help fight those fires. But before he did so, I asked whether the climate crisis will ever be acknowledged by the current government there.
Look, I was at the fire where the 2 firefighters were killed the night before. I'd just finished a 12-hour shift, and when we were returning home, got the news, and it was devastating. But these fires are way out of proportion to anything that we've ever experienced in history. We're in a crisis. Our country is burning. The science marries up with the observations of fire chiefs and firefighters over decades, so we need to take action. And as we've said to the Prime Minister, or tried to say to the Prime Minister by various means, we need to take moral leadership so that we can speak to the big emitters like Brazil, America, India, China, and say, we're doing our bit. We don't emit as much as you do, but please help us. This is a crisis, just as you said, Alex.
What do you need from Mr. Morrison?
Need him to show leadership, national leadership, and stop pretending that they're taking action on climate change. It's an embarrassment to Australia. Those who know what's going on, the Madrid talks, our emissions minister never mentioned the bushfires. The world was watching in horror what's happening here, but never mentioned them, and then sided with those big emitting countries to water down any commitments. So it doesn't matter if the Prime Minister all of a sudden starts to say, yes, I do believe that climate change is affecting the bushfires. He has to follow that up with real action. He needs to cross the political lines and work in a bipartisan manner and bring on board other political parties and come up with a national plan to drastically reduce emissions.
I'm not hearing a single working fire chief across your vast country demanding more resources of central government, and yet they're all saying they can't put the fires out. And they obviously can't put the fires out because they're not putting the fires out. That doesn't make sense.
Because they work for governments who are beholden to Canberra for funding. And look, when I was a fire chief, I was muzzled. I spoke in 2009 after the disastrous Black Saturday fires that killed 173 people, burnt down more than 2,000 homes. I said then to a newspaper, this was climate change in action. We're going to struggle to cope in future. I got in a lot of trouble, and I learnt from that you just don't speak up on things that are seen as policy issues. So, and look, the chiefs have got their hands full. So the retired chiefs, we're taking the ball up for them. I think most of them, I imagine most of them would support what we're saying about climate change, but they do have their hands full. So we'll leave them to do the great work that they're doing, and they're doing an amazing job under terrible circumstances. But we're taking this policy ball forward because somebody has to speak up.
Thanks very much for your time. Deeply appreciated.
Thanks, Alex. All the best.